Abandoned puppy left freezing in -20 degrees Celsius snow for days. Ignored by many, rescued by one incredible woman. The night had turned deadly. A bone-chilling -20 degrees Celsius froze the very air, and the streets were deserted, covered in an untouched layer of snow that glistened eerily beneath the weak streetlights. The wind howled, sharp and biting, slicing through the night, lifting icy snowflakes into the dark, hollow sky. It was a night made for nothing to survive. A night that felt as though the world itself had been swallowed by the cold. Even the usual hum of the city had died down, replaced by the heavy silence of a world gripped in winter's fury. In this brutal cold, the world seemed empty, every corner of the city wrapped in a layer of icy despair. The temperature had plummeted beyond anything natural, far beyond what the average person could bear, let alone a defenseless creature. But somewhere, buried in this cold and silence, was a tiny life fighting to survive. A puppy, no more than a few months old. Its fur, once soft and fluffy, was now stiff with the cold. It lay in the snow, its tiny body shaking, not from play or excitement, but from the numbing freeze that had settled deep within its bones. The puppy's fragile paws were raw, its body too weak to move, too tired to cry out. A soft whimper broke the silence, barely audible against the wind, but the noise was one of desperation. The puppy's tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. Its eyes fluttered open, scanning the dark world around it. No mother, no familiar face. Only the harsh reality of an abandoned life. Its energy was draining fast, and the cold was taking its toll. The world had forgotten it. Around it, people hurried by, too consumed by their own lives to notice the tiny creature in peril. A man in a thick coat stepped around it, muttering about how the streets were full of strays, brushing the puppy off as if it were nothing more than a nuisance. A woman with a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck paused for a split second, her eyes catching the puppy's, but only for a moment before her feet began to move again. She sighed, as if she had seen this before. Something sad, something that didn't warrant her time. Every person that passed seemed to ignore the small life fighting for its survival. The puppy's tiny body lay motionless, almost as if it had given up, as if it had learned that no one would stop, no one would care. The snow continued to fall, covering the puppy's small frame, as its soft whimpers became fewer and fewer. The cold had become too much. But as the night threatened to take its final breath, something, somewhere, began to change. The puppy's journey was far from over. In the distance, amidst the cold and relentless wind, a figure appeared slowly, deliberately, making her way through the icy streets. Her footsteps were soft against the snow, but there was a sense of urgency in her pace. She was a woman on a mission, bundled in a thick coat, scarf wrapped snugly around her neck, her hands buried deep in her pockets to shield them from the biting cold. She had been out running errands when she noticed the unusual quietness of the street, the eerie emptiness that had taken over her neighborhood. As she walked along the sidewalk, her eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in the snow-covered trees, the empty roads, the dimly lit buildings. Then something caught her attention, a small movement against the backdrop of white, almost too faint to notice. She stopped. Her heart skipped a beat, and her instincts kicked in. It was a puppy. At first, she thought it might be a trick of the light or a piece of discarded clothing. But as she took another step forward, she saw it. The tiny body, shivering in the snow, barely conscious. The puppy's fur was clumped together, ice forming on its small frame, its body trembling as it lay on the freezing ground. Without a second thought, she knelt beside the helpless creature. There was no hesitation in her movements, no moment of indecision. She didn't even look around to see if anyone else was watching. There was no time for that. This puppy needed her, and that was all that mattered. Her fingers gently brushed the frost from its coat, her eyes scanning the small body, desperate for any sign of life. The puppy's soft whimper was all she needed to know. This was no time for thinking. She had to act. Her heart ached as she watched the tiny creature struggle to lift its head, its eyes barely opening, filled with confusion and fear. It was a moment of pure instinct, The woman knew she couldn't leave this puppy here. It was a decision that was made without thinking, driven by a deep-rooted compassion she couldn't ignore. But there was a part of her that hesitated for just a fraction of a second. The world had been harsh to her, too. She wasn't wealthy, wasn't prepared to take on the responsibility of an animal in need. She was already juggling so much work, life, commitments. But when she looked into the puppy's eyes, the uncertainty in those innocent, wide-open eyes, something inside her shifted. There was no choice left but to help. She scooped the trembling pup into her arms, cradling it close to her chest, her warmth seeping into its frozen body. As she held it, she could feel the puppy's heartbeat, a small, fragile rhythm that still fought for life despite everything. The woman's mind raced with questions. What if it didn't survive? What if this was a lost cause? But as she looked down at the helpless creature she had just saved, the puppy let out a soft sigh, its tiny body relaxing in her arms. It was as if, in that moment, the puppy had chosen her just as much as she had chosen it. No words were needed. The decision had been made. There was no walking away now. The woman's heart raced as she held the tiny puppy in her arms, its fragile body still shivering despite her best attempts to warm it. Every second counted. She could feel the weight of the cold pressing in around them as she hurried toward her car. The snow continued to fall relentlessly, the wind howling like a wolf at her back, urging her forward. The urgency was overwhelming. She knew the puppy's life was on the line, and every minute she wasted meant another step closer to losing it. She could barely hear the world around her as she focused entirely on the puppy. She could feel the heat from her body radiating into its small frame, but it wasn't enough. The puppy's body was still stiff from the cold, and its little heart was beating unevenly, struggling to stay strong against the elements that had nearly claimed its life. She could see the tiny body tremble with every breath it took, its fur matted with frost. She reached her car in a few short strides, barely taking in the surroundings as she fumbled to open the door. As she settled the puppy onto the passenger seat, her hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization of how close the puppy had been to slipping away. Time was slipping through her fingers like sand. The woman immediately turned the key in the ignition and sped off, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. There was no time to waste on second-guessing or doubt. Every moment was precious. She kept her eyes on the road, but her mind was elsewhere, on the puppy. She could hear its shallow breaths, a soft wheezing sound coming from its chest. The worry in her heart deepened. Was it too late? Would the warmth of the car and her own body be enough to revive it? Or was the damage too severe? The puppy was so small, so fragile. She had to do everything she could to help it survive. The car seemed too slow, the lights of the street flickering by in a blur as she drove, not daring to take her eyes off the puppy. She could feel the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on her, suffocating her with every passing second. The quiet in the car was deafening, save for the sound of the puppy's labored breathing. She tried to keep calm, but she could feel the panic creeping up her spine, her thoughts racing ahead of her. What if it didn't make it through the night? What if she wasn't fast enough? She tried to keep the puppy warm, wrapping it carefully in a blanket she had in the back seat. She drove faster, glancing down at the puppy every few seconds to check its condition. The cold had taken its toll, and it didn't seem to be getting better. The small creature's tiny chest rose and fell in jerky movements, each breath a struggle. The woman could feel the panic rise in her chest, a lump forming in her throat. Once she arrived at the veterinary clinic, she rushed inside, the puppy cradled carefully in her arms. She could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. This was the moment that would determine everything. Would the puppy survive the night? Would it pull through and find its way to safety? Or would the cold, the neglect, the abandonment take its toll once and for all? The vet quickly ushered them into an examination room, and the woman set the puppy on the table, still fighting for life. It was a blur of frantic hands, a flurry of medical terminology, and a flurry of thoughts racing through her mind. The vet moved quickly, checking the puppy's vitals, trying to assess the damage caused by exposure to the brutal cold. The woman barely had time to catch her breath as the vet worked swiftly, talking in reassuring tones, but the woman could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The puppy was in critical condition, and though the vet had hope, the battle wasn't over. For hours, the woman sat by the table, her mind filled with unanswered questions, her heart heavy with fear. She held the puppy's tiny paw in her own, feeling the warmth slowly return to its body, but she couldn't relax just yet. Every time the puppy whimpered or shivered, her heart skipped a beat. Would this be the puppy's final night? Or was it simply the beginning of its chance for survival? Only time would tell. The next morning, the woman stood by the examination table, her hands still gently resting on the puppy's little body as the vet worked diligently to assess its condition. Despite the progress the puppy had made overnight, she couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her. The puppy had survived the brutal cold, but there was still a long road ahead. The vet, an experienced man with a calm and professional demeanor, moved around the room with a sense of purpose, preparing the equipment to run a series of tests. With each passing minute, the woman watched anxiously, unable to tear her eyes away from the tiny creature she had taken in. The puppy's once trembling body now seemed more stable, though it was still so small and fragile. It looked up at her with trusting eyes, its gaze soft and hopeful, as if it knew that this woman had become its lifeline. But as the vet worked, something felt off. His brow furrowed as he carefully examined the puppy, his hands gentle but firm. After a few minutes, he paused, looking up at the woman with a concerned expression. "I'm going to need to run a few more tests," he said, his tone serious but not alarmed. "We've ruled out frostbite, but there are other signs that point to something else." The woman's heart tightened. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The vet didn't speak right away. He finished what he was doing, before explaining with a heavy sigh, "This puppy isn't just sick from exposure. It's had a rough past. Probably been through a lot more than just the cold." Her heart sank, and the room felt smaller, suffocating. The woman's mind raced with questions. What could have happened to this tiny creature that had caused so much damage before it even reached her? What kind of life had it led that had brought it to this point? The truth was starting to weigh heavily on her, and she could feel the rising lump in her throat. As the vet continued his examination, he found several signs of previous trauma. He noted scars on the puppy's small body, signs of neglect that were impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the cold that had hurt the puppy. It had suffered much deeper wounds. The vet explained that these scars weren't from natural causes. They were from mistreatment. He could tell from the way the scars had healed that the puppy had been subjected to something far worse. "They've been caused by something deliberate," the vet said quietly, his voice tinged with regret. "Abuse, perhaps even intentional neglect." It was heartbreaking. The woman felt the blood drain from her face. The idea of someone hurting this sweet, innocent creature seemed unfathomable. She had seen the signs of physical trauma before, but to hear that the puppy had been abused was a truth she wasn't ready for. Her emotions swirled in a mix of anger, disbelief, and sorrow. She looked down at the puppy, who was still quietly resting, unaware of the revelation. To the puppy, the woman was its hero, its savior, the one who had chosen to care for it. Her hands trembled as she stroked its fur. "But why would anyone do that?" she asked, her voice breaking. The vet shook his head slowly. "There's no real answer to that. But this puppy has been through more than any animal should endure in its short life. And it's a miracle it made it out alive." The woman sat there silent, the full weight of the puppy's past sinking in. Every small scar, every injury was a reminder of the cruelty it had suffered at the hands of others, a cruelty that had left deep emotional and physical scars. The puppy had endured pain and neglect long before it was abandoned in the snow. It had been robbed of the love and care it deserved, and now here it was, fighting for its future. The woman made a silent vow as she looked down at the puppy, a quiet promise that she would be the one to heal it. She would give it the love, the care, and the attention it had been denied for so long. But she knew this wouldn't be an easy journey. The scars, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she was ready. For this puppy, she would be its protector, its savior, its second chance. The days after the puppy's rescue felt like an emotional roller coaster, filled with moments of triumph and setbacks. The tiny creature had made it through the harsh cold, but it was far from being out of danger. The woman spent every waking hour focused on the puppy's recovery. The journey wasn't going to be quick or easy. It would take time, patience, and a tremendous amount of love. She knew that the scars, both physical and emotional, wouldn't disappear overnight. At first, the puppy seemed to be fighting a quiet battle inside. There were moments when it seemed so frail, its tiny body trembling under the weight of its past. But the woman was relentless. She warmed the puppy with blankets, fed it small amounts of food, and gently held it close to her chest when it seemed to struggle. She whispered soft words of encouragement, trying to reassure it that it was safe now. But every step forward was met with another challenge. The puppy had difficulty trusting, its wide eyes always looking at her with a hint of uncertainty. It would pull away if she moved too quickly, as if expecting some sort of punishment or pain. It wasn't just the physical recovery that was difficult. It was the emotional healing that was taking its toll. The woman couldn't bear to see the fear in the puppy's eyes, and yet, she understood it. The puppy had learned that love and care weren't guaranteed. It had been abandoned and hurt, and trust had been broken. But the woman refused to give up. She continued to care for the puppy with unwavering dedication, determined to show it that not all humans were capable of cruelty. Slowly, the puppy began to respond to her kindness, though it was small at first. The first time it gently licked her hand was a victory in itself. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A small sign that the puppy was beginning to understand that it was safe, that it was loved, and that it was allowed to trust again. The weeks that followed were filled with tests of patience. The puppy's healing process wasn't linear, and there were many times when it felt as though the progress was too slow, the setbacks too overwhelming. The puppy's body grew stronger with each passing day, but its soul, its sense of safety and trust, was much harder to rebuild. There were days when the woman would sit on the floor, watching the puppy play with a new toy she had bought, but every time someone came to the door or raised their voice, the puppy would freeze in fear, its tail tucking between its legs. It was as if the world outside her home was a constant threat, one that could never be trusted. At times, the woman found herself frustrated, her heart breaking as she saw the puppy's progress stall. But she knew this was part of the healing process. There would be moments of doubt, moments when she questioned if her efforts would ever truly be enough. Yet, she reminded herself daily that healing was not a race. It was a journey. She couldn't rush the puppy's healing any more than she could rush the sunrise. She often found herself talking softly to the puppy, telling it how proud she was of every little step it took. She'd remind herself that every time it came a little closer to her or let its guard down for just a moment, it was a sign of progress. Even when the setbacks felt discouraging, she reminded herself that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a process filled with ups and downs. But through it all, one thing remained constant: her love for the puppy. She would stay by its side no matter how difficult the road became. Every moment, no matter how small, was a step toward the puppy's new life. Then one morning, something incredible happened. The woman was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, when she heard a soft rustling at her feet. She looked down, half expecting the puppy to be curled up in its usual spot on the couch. But instead, it was standing there, looking up at her with those wide, trusting eyes. For a moment, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The puppy was standing on its own, looking as though it was waiting for something. Perhaps waiting for her to acknowledge its progress, to see how far it had come. The woman put down her coffee, tears welling in her eyes as she slowly reached out her hand. She watched in awe as the puppy cautiously took a step toward her, then another, its tail wagging ever so slightly. It was the first time the puppy had truly approached her without hesitation. It was a simple act, just a few small steps, but to the woman it was monumental. It was a sign of trust, a sign that the puppy was beginning to understand that it was safe, that it was home. She dropped to her knees, pulling the puppy into her arms, feeling the warmth of its small body against her chest. "You're doing it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. You're healing. I knew you could." In that moment, the bond between them deepened in ways words couldn't express. The puppy had been through hell, but now, in her arms, it had found peace. It had found love. And though the road ahead would still be challenging, there was finally a glimmer of hope. The puppy was no longer the broken creature that had been abandoned in the snow. It was a survivor, with a future full of possibilities. That first step toward her was the sign she had been waiting for, the first real sign of hope in their journey together. And with it came a new sense of determination. She knew that with every ounce of love and patience she had, she could help this puppy heal completely. Together, they would face the future, whatever it held, with strength and courage. The journey with the puppy had been one of uncertainty and hope, love and struggle. As the weeks passed, the puppy grew stronger, but the question loomed ever larger in the woman's mind. Could she keep this little creature, who had already captured her heart in ways she never imagined? She had made it through the hard days, the sleepless nights, and the emotional roller coaster of watching the puppy heal. But now, it was time for the ultimate decision. The thought of letting the puppy go to another home was unbearable. She had already become so intertwined in its life, so deeply invested in its healing that the idea of parting from it felt like ripping away a piece of her soul. The puppy had become a part of her. Its scars, its fears, its progress. They all belonged to her now. But she also understood that love wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes, it was about making the right choice, even if it was painful. Her heart was torn in two. She knew that the puppy needed stability, a safe home that would offer it everything it deserved. Security, affection, and the promise of never being abandoned again. Yet, part of her couldn't imagine a life without the little one by her side. Would it be selfish to keep the puppy, knowing that it could have a better life with a family who could offer more than she could? Was her attachment to the puppy clouding her judgment? The decision weighed heavily on her mind. She thought about what was best for the puppy, not just in the moment but for its future. She knew it deserved more than just survival. It deserved a life full of love, joy, and freedom. And so, with a heavy heart, she began to consider what would truly be best for the puppy's future. It was during this time of uncertainty that something unspoken passed between them. The puppy, now nearly fully recovered, would look at her with those soulful eyes that had been filled with fear and uncertainty when they first met, but now were filled with trust and something more. An unspoken plea. It wasn't in words or actions, but in the way the puppy would curl up beside her on the couch, resting its head on her lap, or how it would nudge her hand when she stopped petting it. The puppy had come to rely on her, and that silent bond, that unspoken communication, was what made the decision even harder. The puppy had no words, no ability to make its needs known beyond the most basic forms of communication. Yet, every time the woman looked into those eyes, she could feel its quiet plea. "Please, don't leave me. Don't send me away." It wasn't a loud cry, but a soft whisper that reverberated in the woman's heart. The puppy had been through so much, abandoned, forgotten, left to die alone in the snow, and she couldn't ignore the fact that, for whatever it was worth, this little soul had chosen her. It had learned to trust her, to see her as its protector, its safe place. And as much as she wrestled with the decision, she couldn't shake the feeling that the puppy was asking her to be its forever home. In every cuddle, every moment of connection, the puppy seemed to remind her of how far they had come together. She saw the puppy's spirit flourishing in her care, and it was clear that the bond between them was growing stronger with each passing day. Would she really let that go? Could she live with the knowledge that the puppy might not find the same kind of love in another home? It was clear to her that this wasn't just about rescuing the puppy from the cold. It was about rescuing it from the fear of abandonment, from the loneliness it had known before, and offering it a future where it would never have to feel that way again. As the days passed and the weight of the decision grew heavier, the woman finally made her choice. It wasn't a choice made in haste, nor was it one made without great sacrifice. But as she looked down at the puppy, its warm body curled in her arms, she knew, deep in her heart, that she couldn't let go. The love they shared had deepened beyond what she could have ever expected. The puppy, now fully healed and full of life, had blossomed into a playful, loving dog who had reclaimed its joy. There was no fear in its eyes anymore, only trust, love, and an unwavering connection to her. It had become clear to her that this little soul was meant to be hers forever. She could give it everything it needed: safety, affection, and most of all, the promise that it would never again have to face the world alone. With tears in her eyes and a heart brimming with love, she whispered to the puppy, "You're home now. This is your forever home. I promise. I will always be here for you." In that moment, the puppy licked her hand, its tail wagging, and she knew it understood. The silent plea had been answered. This was their new beginning. There would be no more cold nights alone in the snow, no more fear of being abandoned or forgotten. This was a story of survival, of healing, and ultimately of love. The woman had made the decision to give the puppy a forever home, not just a shelter, not just a temporary stop in its journey, but a place where it would always feel safe, valued, and loved. And as they walked through life together, side by side, it was clear that this decision had changed everything, for both of them. The puppy was no longer just a survivor. It was part of a family, a beloved companion who would be by her side through all the days to come. The puppy that had once been discarded in the freezing snow, abandoned to face the cold, had undergone a transformation that few could have imagined. From the frail, shivering creature that had struggled to survive, it had blossomed into a lively, healthy, and confident dog. The puppy's journey was nothing short of remarkable. It had gone from being nothing more than a victim of neglect to becoming a symbol of resilience. But this wasn't just a physical transformation. As the puppy grew stronger, so did its spirit. The woman had watched in awe as the little creature, once terrified and withdrawn, began to trust again, to play, to experience the joy of companionship. No longer did it shy away from human touch. Now it sought her out, wagging its tail with excitement at the mere sight of her. Every day, the puppy learned more about the world, about love, and about the beauty of connection. It was a far cry from the frightened soul it had been when it was first found. And as it grew, it was clear that this was a life that had been saved, not just from the cold, but from a fate of fear and abandonment. The woman had not just saved the puppy's life, she had given it a future, and in doing so, she had transformed both of their lives in ways she could never have predicted. Together, they had both healed, each finding solace and strength in the other. This was no longer just a story of rescue. It was a story of two beings finding new hope, together. The puppy had found a second chance, and the woman had found a companion she never knew she needed. The life they shared now was one of mutual love, trust, and understanding, a bond forged in adversity and solidified by care. In their time together, the woman came to realize that the love she had given to the puppy was being returned in ways she had never imagined. The puppy had gone from being the one who needed care to being the one who provided comfort. In moments of sadness or stress, the puppy would be there, nuzzling her hand or curling up beside her, sensing her emotions in a way that only an animal could. There was something profound in this silent communication. While she had once been the one to provide safety and security for the puppy, now the puppy was giving her something just as invaluable: unconditional love and companionship. It was a love that needed no words, no grand gestures, just the presence of each other, in moments both big and small. She had learned to lean on the puppy in her own times of struggle, just as the puppy had learned to trust her when it had no one else. Their love wasn't one-sided. It was a partnership, a mutual care and respect that strengthened with every passing day. The puppy had been her reason to keep going during the darkest times, and in return, the puppy had a home filled with warmth, food, and the love of someone who had chosen it. This bond, so deeply rooted in the foundation of kindness and shared healing, was something that would only continue to grow. The woman no longer saw herself as just a rescuer, but as part of a team, a family, a bond of love that went both ways. The story of the puppy's rescue wasn't just about saving an animal from certain death. It was about the power of compassion, the strength of resilience, and the life-changing impact that a single act of kindness can have. The woman, looking down at the now joyful, healthy dog at her feet, couldn't help but reflect on the journey they had taken together. She had set out to rescue a helpless animal from the cold, but in doing so, she had saved herself too. Through her act of kindness, she had rediscovered the capacity for love, for giving, and for healing. The puppy, who had once been abandoned in the snow, had found its way into a world filled with love and promise. And the woman, who had given so much of herself to care for the puppy, had found a companion who would walk with her through life, sharing in both the joys and the challenges. In their final moment together, the woman whispered softly to the puppy, "You saved me, just as much as I saved you." It was a simple truth, but a powerful one. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give to another living being is our love and our willingness to care. And sometimes, in return, that love comes back to us in ways we never expected. The puppy's journey had come full circle, from being abandoned in the cold to finding a warm, loving home. But the story didn't end there. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities and the kind of love that only grows with time. As they walked together into the future, side by side, the woman knew that she had found her forever companion, and the puppy knew it had finally found its place, its family, its home. Together, they would face whatever came next, their bond stronger than ever, a testament to the power of hope, love, and the unbreakable spirit of resilience. As the screen fades to black, the journey of the puppy and the woman leaves a lasting impact on the viewer. It's more than just a story of rescue. It's a testament to the power of compassion, transformation, and the enduring bond between humans and animals. But this isn't just their story. It could be anyone's story. We all have the power to make a difference. These words echo in the minds of those watching. Whether it's offering a helping hand to someone in need or giving a second chance to a living being that's been left behind, each act of kindness counts. And just like the woman in the story, anyone can be the one who steps up when the world feels too cold, too indifferent. At this pivotal moment, the call to action becomes clear. Encourage the audience to act. The woman didn't just rescue the puppy from the freezing cold. She became its forever family. Viewers are prompted to consider how they, too, can make a difference. If this story touched your heart, share it. Share the love, share the hope. You never know who you might inspire today. And if you're thinking about adopting, fostering, or helping an animal in need, take the first step. You could change a life. As the video closes, viewers are encouraged to engage not just by watching, but by sharing their own stories in the comments, offering support to those who may be in a similar position, or reaching out to local animal rescues in their communities. The goal is to spark a movement, a ripple effect of compassion. Tell us in the comments, what was your biggest takeaway from this story? Have you ever rescued or been rescued? Share your story, and let's keep this chain of kindness going. By ending on an inspiring and motivating note, the audience is left feeling empowered, encouraged to take action, and reminded that change starts with the decisions they make. The heartwarming story of the puppy and the woman has now planted a seed, and it's up to them to decide how they will let it grow. Remember, every act of kindness counts. Your love, your compassion, your actions can change the world, one life at a time.